Can't say I personally expected a fusion monster for Dark Worlds for their first bit of new support, but Structure Deck R Dark Worlds is on the way, and we have the first wave of releases from it. So let's jump into the video and check out the new Dark World cards. Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for watching the video. Before we get started here talking about the new Dark World cards that have been announced so far from the Structure Deck, just want to ask if you do enjoy the content and the conversation, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Click the bell icon to stay notified of new uploads. Try to upload multiple times a week to cover all the news and talk about different topics and such. Last week was a massive week in terms of content, and I did the best that I could. There's still a few things I want to catch up on, but I had to do the Dark World video first. It's definitely really exciting to see some of these cards not only have amazing artwork, which has been par for the course for Dark Worlds for a long time, but have some really solid effects, and at the end of the day, that's really what matters in terms of potential playability. So this is not the full reveal for the Structure Deck. We've gotten 4 cards so far. I don't know when the rest are set to come, but I'm guessing it's going to be anywhere between 7 and 9 total. So I'll cover the second wave when and if we get that announcement. Starting off, we have Grapha, Dragon Overlord of Dark World. It is a level 10 Dark Fiend fusion monster that requires Grapha, Dragon Lord of Dark World, and 1 Dark Monster. And it says as follows: when your opponent activates a normal spell or trap or monster effect, quick effect, you can make that effect become your opponent discards 1 card. You can only use this effect of Grapha, Dragon Overlord of Dark World once per turn. If this fusion summon card leaves the field by an opponent's card, you can special summon one of your Grapha, Dragon Lord of Dark World that is banished or in your graveyard. Then each player discards 1 card. So let's unpack that. The first effect here only works in response to a normal spell or trap or a monster effect. So that's not a huge deal, but you can't use it in response to something like Cosmic Cyclone or any type of field or continuous spell, which kind of makes sense because you are changing the effect, so it's a temporary change. You can't really do that on a permanent card. But I digress. You're basically, this is basically a more effective way to get the better Dark World effects, the ones that trigger when your opponent makes you discard. For so long, and really the only way to do that was with Ceruli, but now you have a boss monster that can do it, and basically, if your opponent plays anything to start their turn, you have the ability to proc some really powerful effects from your hand. And then, of course, the Fusion Summon card leaving the field by an opponent's card is pretty, wide in terms of its application. If the opponent destroys it in battle, if they banish it with a card effect, destroy it, tribute it, whatever it is, anything that's causing it to leave the effect, you get to special summon a Grapha from your banish zone or grave, and then each player discards a card. So, your opponent's going to have to exhaust resources to get over this, but also then discard a card, and in most cases, you discarding a card is not going to be detrimental to you because that's kind of what you want to do in this deck. So it's a cool way to put some pressure on the opponent and actually cause them to lose advantage while allowing you to get a monster back and hopefully trigger more of your effects, especially when you consider that cards like Danger are some of the Danger package anyway, are definitely going to be optimal to play in this strategy. So overall, Grapha himself is pretty good. It's also a Super Poly target, so if you're playing Grapha, you can take an opponent's monster with Super Poly, just a card that sees a ton of play, and it never hurts to have that extra option. Rainbow, Supreme Overlord of Dark World. So this is a retrain of Rainbow. The original one is pretty terrible. This one definitely seems a bit better, though. A level 8 Dark Fiend. You can special summon this card from your graveyard by returning 1 level 7 or lower Dark World monster you control to the hand. If this card is discarded by card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can add 1 level 5 or higher Dark World monster from your deck to your hand, except this card. Then, if it was discarded by an opponent, you can special summon 1 level 4 or lower Dark World monster from your deck or graveyard to either field. So this is actually really powerful both ways. If it's discarded, you can search a level 5 or higher Dark World. Typically, you're going to go for Grapha to get him in hand, but there are other targets like Lucent that we'll talk about in a moment when we look at some of the, related card applications for these new ones. But if you are able to trigger it with an opponent's discard, in addition to the search, you also get to special summon a level 4 or lower Dark World to either field, meaning you can special summon Ceruli from your deck to your opponent's field, which would then allow you to discard something, and of course, really start to combo off from there. But you always have the option to just summon a Dark World to your field and keep going off with your plays. So it's pretty cool to see Rainbow's retrain, and he's definitely one of the better Dark World cards. Being able to special himself just by bouncing a Dark World on the field is also a major upgrade and something that Dark Worlds kind of need, because before, Grapha was the only way to do it, and if it gets called by the Graved or banished in some capacity, you really didn't have a ton of other options. So it's nice to have another name that can do that while also having a solid attack and sort of stats to boost itself up. Just to note, you can special summon this card from your graveyard by returning one level 7 or lower Dark World monster you control to the hand. Is not a once per turn either, so you can kind of spam the board pretty heavily and pretty fast, depending on what combos you're putting out. Now, Dark World Accession is a quick play spell with awesome artwork. This art is so cool. During the main phase, fusion summon one Fiend Fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing materials listed on it from your field and or grave. If summoning a Dark World Fusion monster this way, you can also discard monsters from your hand as material. During your main phase, if this card is in your graveyard, you can add it to your hand, then discard one Dark World monster. So it's a polymerization that's searchable. It allows you to use field and or grave, meaning you can banish from grave to fusion summon any Fiend Fusion monster, which has to have some application. There's got to be other Fiend Fusion monsters out there that I'm not aware of on the top of my head, and I'm sure people will figure that out, but be any of them, you know, and you can basically do this during the battle phase as a quick play spell, which means you can push for extra damage, which of course for Dark World is huge because they are going to typically play as an OTK sort of heavy pressure strategy. But you can also discard monsters as material, so it specifically says discard, meaning you can fusion summon but also get the cost by discarding them, so it's different than if you use polymerization. So it's really neat to see that's the first application of discarding for fusion summoning, so it's just cool from that perspective. And then of course, you know, if it's in the grave, you can discard Dark World monster, get it back to your hand. That's going to trigger the Dark World monster effects as well, and of course is going to make it easier to get your fusion monster out. So a lot of things going on with this card. Being a quick play is the biggest thing it has going for it, but the fact that you can use graveyard, which then allows you to banish a Grapha you can bring back later when your fusion monster leaves the field, you can kind of see where these start to build into a somewhat competent combo that I think is going to have to work out the numbers in terms of how many of each card you're playing and all of that, but it's actually a really good spell, and Dark World has a few good spells, but it's kind of lacking in that department, so this is welcome to see. And the last one we have so far is Dark World Puppet. It's a quick play spell, very similar art to Dark Smog, which is obviously by design, but Snow's looking pretty cool there, and then I think that's YuGiOh, Lightsworn Hunter, or one of the variants of the Lightsworn YuGiOh there. It says target up to 3 cards in any graveyards. Banish them, then discard one Fiend monster. During your main phase, except the turn this card was sent to the grave, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one of your banished fiends. Add it to your hand. You can only activate one Dark World Puppet per turn. So that first effect is a hard once per turn, the second effect is not, which is good to know, I suppose, later in the game, especially because of how often you're discarding. It does have that except the turn it was sent there thing, so it is going to work against it slightly, but I don't think it's going to be a huge detriment, being a searchable out to a lot of problem cards, because it can banish any cards, so against decks like Sky Striker, against decks like Sword Soul, you do have a lot of ways to, like, combo, and obviously there's certain things you're not going to want to banish, and you really sort of have to, like, figure out the best ways to make this card work, but it does a bit for you in terms of application, and being able to get a banished Fiend monster back is pretty cool, especially because if you banish something with Gates of Dark World and then get your draws, you kind of, you know, ways to get your resources back is something Dark World has struggled with for a long time, so it is nice to see them going in that direction. So Dark World Puppet is sort of the least intriguing of the 4, but I think it definitely has a place in the deck. Now, a few things I do want to talk about as far as support cards go. Lucent Netherlord of Dark World is a really good card. It's a super rare from Primal Origin that only has 1 print, and it was really high in value for a little while. Last I checked, it's around 8 to 10 bucks, but it says if it's discarded from the hand to the graveyard by a card effect, special it from the grave. Then, if it was discarded by an opponent's card effect, you can special summon one Fiend-type monster from your deck to either side of the field. So what's the purpose of this? Well, you have access to cards like Ceruli, which you can put on your opponent's field, and then you discard a card, and it counts as your opponent making you discard. So if there's different ways to get Ceruli out on the field, certainly it's pretty easy to do just by playing a Dark World card and discarding it. That's definitely not going to be the challenge. But a really interesting combo that exists, of course, is once Lucent is actually triggered that way, you can special summon Barrier Statue of the Abyss to either field. In some cases, you can summon it to yours, locking your opponent out of dark monsters, but depending on the deck you're playing against, you can also summon it to the opponent's field too, and kind of put them in a really tough position. So obviously decks like Branded and Despia aren't going to have a hard time getting Barrier Statue of the Abyss off the field, but if you're playing against a deck that doesn't play any dark monster, doesn't have any way to remove this Barrier Statue, it's kind of interesting to just sort of put it there and lock the opponent. They can't play cards like Lightning Storm and Impermanence, and you can kind of go off and do your combos while also restricting them in a way that doesn't negatively impact you. So really cool from that perspective to kind of see what types of things we're looking at here with combos like this. I'm expecting that all three, well, maybe not Baron Statue, but the other two should definitely get reprinted in the structure deck, I would imagine. Cerulea's pretty cheap, but it's just a good card to keep an eye on that was looked at as bad for so long, but now actually has a lot of really cool application in the deck, especially because of how much easier it is to kind of proc your effects with it, and the more Dark World cards we get, the more powerful those effects become, it seems, especially looking at some of the new ones. And of course, the Danger package plus Super Poly is going to be pretty standard in these builds as well. I don't know what the numbers would look like, but being able to utilize cards like Dangers to not only give you big bodies on the field, but also discard your Dark Worlds, give you the ability to link into certain things, to fuse into certain things. It's just, you don't care about discarding, and the board spam helps further your goal of OTKs. And Super Poly, I'd be kind of remiss to not mention it. It's just more powerful now than ever, but in a deck like this, now that you have a generic sort of Dark World target for it with Grapha, it's just something extra to consider. And of course, you still have things like Starving Venom and all the other Super Poly targets that work for the purposes that they serve. So that being said, this is actually really exciting, and I hope that they kind of follow suit with some more interesting you know, cards as we go forward, but they look really good so far, and I think there's a chance for these cards to actually be playable. I don't know what level they could ascend to. I mean, they're still going to be hurt by things that banish, but a little bit less so now that you have ways to get some of that stuff back. So let me know what you guys think of the conversation. What do you think of the Dark World cards? Are you excited so far? Sound off in the comments down below, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.